Here we go.
Well, thank you all very much for coming. We appreciate this. This is a series of river talks that we have. Brian Jorley is our community engagement manager, runs these sessions. And we are thrilled tonight in particular to have Ben Spinelli speak. I'll give a very brief introduction to Ben in a minute, but I thought it'd be great if we could at least hear who is around the table. So quickly, Bill, if you could just introduce yourself and go over.
Bill McQuaid, I live in Hampton. Bill Evans from Middle Valley.
Bill Sen from, no, this is joking. Mary Sen. I live on the Musconetcong in Washington.
I'm Doreen Gramley and I live in Phillipsburg.
I'm Richard Cotton, president of the watershed, and live in the watershed around the corner in Asbury.
Excellent. We have some folks hybrid, virtual. So if we could ask some of the folks who are on, if they could introduce them.
Hey, good evening, everybody. It's Michael Fox, part of the MWA board.
Call them out.
Yeah.
John,
John Wheeler, I'm in Seaville, New Jersey.
welcome. Brittany,
Hi all, Brittany Welchbrook, New Jersey Audubon. Just started working up in the Musconetcong Watershed. So excited to learn about what you're speaking on tonight.
excellent. And Callie,
Yes, good evening. Honored to, with the surround, Callie Alexander, NOFA, New Jersey Policy Chair and local resident. Thank you.
welcome. And Alan,
Hi, Alan Hunt, Director of Policy Grants, the Musconetcong Watershed Association. I am home helping my daughter with homework, so I am mostly in listening mode, but I'm very glad we have Mr. Spinelli tonight.
excellent. Thank you. And so, and there we go. We have one more person coming in. So, and we have Matt Polsky here also. Hi, Matt. Good to see you. So Ben Spinelli is the Executive Director of the New Jersey Highlands Council. Technically, it's called the New Jersey Highlands Water Protection and Planning Council. And if you want to know more about the New Jersey Highlands Act, you can find that on the state's website. And of course, the Highlands Council has its own website. Ben's career has taken a number of different paths. And I thought I was keeping busy, but Ben runs circles around me. Both in the public and the private sectors. Over 20 years as a trial attorney, 3 terms as the elected mayor of Chester Township, yes, in Morris County, and several senior level roles in government, state, local, and federal levels. Prior to joining the New Jersey Highlands Council, he was a consultant with Greener by Design, provided regulatory and policy guidance to businesses, landowners, government entities in New Jersey, as well as multinational corporations and energy partnerships. Ben is a sought after speaker, so we're thrilled that he's actually here tonight. I heard Ben give
that part.
Yeah, no, seriously. Ben gave a presentation to the State Planning Commission 2 months ago. That was probably the most substantive presentation given to the State Planning Commission in a decade. So critically important. Speaker on smart growth, sustainability, a number of different issues. He served on numerous boards, including Garden State Preservation Trust, the State Agriculture Development Committee, New Jersey Environmental Infrastructure Trust, Morris County Open Space and Farmland Preservation Trust, the Morris County League of Municipalities, and one of the original members of the New Jersey Highlands Water Protection and Planning Council. So Ben has seen both sides now. I can only imagine which side he'd rather be on, but days like today, I think we'll hear more about some of the challenges and the opportunities. He was also a senior policy advisor for the President's Task Force on Superstorm Sandy Disaster Recovery, and was the Executive Director of the New Jersey Office of Smart Growth. So he brings a statewide and a federal perspective to all. In his spare time, he's an adjunct professor at Kane University, which I think is quite amazing. He has his law degree from Seton Hall University and his undergraduate degree from Muhlenberg College. He's been involved in all sorts of different activities, volunteer activities. But I think the most fascinating thing that I heard about Ben is he's been to every municipality in New Jersey. Wow. And that in and of itself, I think, just our credential.
it was 568 when they first did it. Now it's down, right now we're down to 564. Since Pine Valley decided not to be their own town.
Glacial movements, but progress.
Yeah, they only had like 6 people, right?
Right. So with that, we thank you, Ben. We welcome you, and we'll give a presentation, and we'll have questions and answers. And as I said before, feel free to eat and drink. And
Thanks, Tom. I'm really happy to be here. Okay, Brian. So hopefully I can work this.
Just a down arrow and up arrow should
Okay.
get done.
It does. It works. Okay, so I'm here to give you a little bit of an overview of the Highlands, and I feel it's important to go back to the real basics of why the Highlands is important, because I think since the Highlands Act was passed, we've kind of taken the position that once the Highlands Act came into being, everything was taken care of, and we didn't have to worry about it anymore. And nothing could be further than the truth. Right? We have to be able to manage the resources of the region because they are so important. To begin with, New Jersey is a part of a much greater Highlands area, right? The federal government recognized the Highlands as a 4-state region stretching from Pennsylvania all the way to Connecticut. Technically, it really stretches into southern Massachusetts and probably into northern Maryland. The one common denominator across the entirety of the region and the geological province is that it serves as the water supply for the big cities of the Northeast. And for New Jersey, it's the water supply for nearly 70% of the state's population. In 2004, New Jersey took the charge of, let me just take another step back. The federal government conducted a study of the 4-state Highlands region back in 2000 to 2002 and concluded that the area was important to be preserved, that the resources of the area were unique, that they were important to the more populated portions of the Northeast, and that measures had to be taken to ensure that they would always be there. New Jersey took that charge seriously, and in 2004 passed the Highlands Water Protection and Planning Act that set aside at this part of the state for exactly that reason. So when the Highlands Act was passed, it encompassed 88 municipalities across portions of 7 counties. I think one of the big drawbacks of the law is that it divided the area into a planning area and a preservation area. Planning area being the portion of the state of the Highlands region where conformance with the Highlands Act and the Highlands Regional Master Plan would be voluntary at the municipal level. The preservation area where it would be mandatory. And that dichotomy has led to some problems about how we manage the area for the long term, but there are ways for us to get over that. But basically it's most of Warren County, the northern part of Hunterdon County, most of Morris County, a small portion of Somerset, small portion of Bergen, and the northern part of Passaic County, and the eastern part of Sussex County. Right here, you can look and see this is right out of the Highlands legislation, right? That the Highlands is an essential source of drinking water, contains other exceptional natural resources, such as clean air, contiguous forest lands, wetlands, pristine watersheds, and habitat for flora and fauna, along with historic sites of historic significance, and an abundant source of recreational opportunities for the citizens of the state, all of which are absolutely true. Here, what are we protecting, right? As I said, the drinking water supply for 70% of New Jersey's residents only comprise 17% of the landmass of New Jersey, but nearly 7 million people need it for water supply alone. That in and of itself dictates the importance of preserving the resources of the area, but there's so much more to the Highlands than just the water. But let me just take a second and give you something for comparison. New York City, right? When you talk about what New York City's footprint is, right? Everybody will say, oh, it's the 5 boroughs of Manhattan, but you realize that New York City, on the geographic footprint of those 5 boroughs, could never exist as the city that it is today. New York City was smart enough back in the late 19th century to set aside 2,000 square miles of the Catskills and the Croton watershed on the east side of the Hudson to provide for its water supply. It's the only way that New York City could grow into a city of over 9 million people and remain viable. Right? And that same kind of investment is analogous to what we've done here. We've set aside just over 1,400 square miles of New Jersey to provide for a very similar population. But along with the water supply comes a number of environmental resources, the forests of the region, which are not just important in and of themselves as an ecological resource, but they are the core of the clean, sufficient drinking water supply that's there, right? The river, streams, and wetlands, the natural communities that all are part of what makes the Highlands such a special place. The agricultural lands, particularly in the southwestern portion of the Highlands, rural landscapes, the great small towns that characterize the area. Right, and just to take a step back in time so that we can remember, because again, sometimes our success makes us forget why we took bold measures like the Highlands Act. But if you go back to the late 20th century, which sounds crazy, when you go back to the late 1990s and the early 2000s, right, the land of the Highlands was being eaten up at an alarming rate, and this was an animation done by Rick Lathrop down at Rutgers that showed you just how fast land was being consumed, and it threatened the water supply, it threatened the natural habitats. Right, suburban sprawl would have overwhelmed the region if we hadn't taken certain measures to make sure that we would put the land aside so that it would always be there for the use of people from New Jersey. Today, and again, I started out saying, we're victims of our own success, and we start to think that, that maybe the risk is past, maybe we can loosen up the restrictions in the area, but we're still subject to threats to the region, right? The Highlands Act did not put an end to all development. But what we find today is that the threats are a little bit different, right? Primarily, it's going to be the farmlands of the regions that are at risk. They're the lands that are flat. They're not constrained by the regulatory measures that DEP has on wetlands. They're steep slopes. And the other thing is that we've got Route 287, Route 80, and Route 78 running through the region, so that it's become very, very attractive for warehouse developers, right? And so we look at a lot of people are looking at the open space of the Highlands very jealously. Not just warehouse developers, solar developers, housing that's been driven by pandemic demand, and it's still a risk. And you throw on top of that, as though it wasn't hard enough to manage those threats to the area, you've got two other things going, right? Not all Highlands municipalities in the planning area where it's voluntary to conform to the regional master plan are planning appropriately, and you've got climate change thrown on top of that. That's really making it more of a challenge to try to project out what the resources of the Highlands are going to look like not just 10 years from now, 50 years from now, or 100 years from now. And that kind of perspective is important to remember, because the Highlands is a forever act, right? In perpetuity, making sure that there's going to be a drinking water supply, not just tomorrow, but 100 years from tomorrow. And that's the kind of mindset we've got to bring to managing the region, understanding that future generations are going to rely on it. Just the same way that New York City relies on a decision that was made over 130 years ago to set aside their watershed lands. The day is going to come when we're going to realize how forward-thinking the Highlands Act was in making sure that the water supply is going to be there for future New Jersey residents. And when I was mayor, I used to say there's a philosophy that you should bring to your decision-making process, right? We all want to be liked in the present, and you don't want people yelling at you down at the ShopRite or at your kid's football game. But the decision-making process you should go through is, 50 years from now, when somebody looks back and says, well, I don't know who did this, but thank God whoever did it did this because it was the right thing to do. Not what were those idiots thinking 50 years ago. And I think not just that shouldn't be the philosophy that drives us, but it really demonstrates, right, that the kind of decision-making process we need to go through to ensure that the decisions that we make are going to be durable. So let me just take a step into how we implement the regional master plan, which was completed not long after the Highlands Act was put into place. It's a series of policies and goals and data collection and underlying environmental information that really guide how the long-term future of the region needs to be managed. We try to make sure that the municipalities of the Highlands are planning in accordance with that regional master plan to the greatest extent possible, because regardless of the regional perspective that the Highlands brings to the Highlands, the rubber meets the road in New Jersey at the municipal level, right? It's a home rule state, it still is. We can provide all the guidance we want. We can require compliance with the regional master plan all we want. But at the end of the day, the decisions are made at the local level. So we try to give planning grants to municipalities and to counties to make sure that they're planning their future in alignment with the regional master plan. We do project reviews, mostly for projects that are in the preservation area. But my contention is that we should be reviewing those projects region-wide, regardless of the divide between the planning area and the preservation area. We provide technical assistance and guidance, things like model ordinances and model scopes of work. In particular, right now, stormwater is a big issue for the municipalities of the region. And we've provided stormwater scopes of work so that towns can hire their professionals and follow things through in an appropriate manner. We came out with our warehouse guidance earlier. Earlier this year. It still is this year, to try to give some appropriate guidance to municipalities that are trying to play catch up with warehouse developments that have hit them when I don't think they saw it coming. And we have to both get even, but also get ahead of the warehouse boom in the state. I said an MS4 permit changes for stormwater. And coming soon, we're going to be giving guidance to the municipalities on climate resilience and affordable housing. We also have a land preservation program that can match federal funding that comes from the Federal Highlands Conservation Act. But right now, that's a problem because we don't have a dedicated source of funding for the Highlands Open Space Program. And what I'm really advocating for at the state level is for us to be given a portion of the corporate business tax that's dedicated right now to Green Acres, SADC, and the historic preservation offices, to take a small portion of that and dedicate it to the Highlands so that we can pick up a lot of the land within the region that is still at risk of development. In fact, when we did an analysis of the Highlands region, there are still about 19,000 privately owned parcels that are undeveloped but developable. Many of those somewhere over 95% of those parcels are less than 50 acres in size. They don't fit neatly within the SADC's farmland preservation guidelines, and they don't fit neatly within the Green Acres or local land preservation guidelines. Yet they still are better off being undeveloped than they are being developed. The other side of that is it would give us the opportunity to get some equity into the hands of those landowners who have had their development potential greatly reduced by the Highlands Act. And so it just makes sense. We're annually leaving millions of dollars of federal funding on the table because of our inability to match those funds. And it just makes no sense whatsoever. The Highlands Council and the Musconetcong Watershed are more near and dear to your hearts, right? It is really the heart of the Highlands, right? The Musconetcong River runs nearly the length of the region, right through the middle of the region. 24 Highlands municipalities were in the watershed. We've invested over $500,000 in planning grants to municipalities along the river, and another $1.1 million in around Lake Apacon at the headwaters of the river. Our planning work has included lake and stream and watershed management, restoration, stormwater management, water use and conservation management, and wastewater management. And one of my priorities right now, and it's particularly important to the Musconetcong watershed, is to support agriculture within the region. The surest way to keep agricultural lands from being converted to another use is to make sure that they are still valuable as agricultural lands. And we want to make sure that farmers can make a decent living, that there is no pressure for them to convert that land to some other use. And to rely solely on the Farmland Preservation Program, which is a great program, to sell it short, but that alone, just from the sheer number of farms, it would take 100 years to get through the preservation program, to get those farms to the preservation program. We just don't have that kind of time. If you think of, well, I'll get to that. I'll come back to that in a second. So right now, our priorities are that agricultural sustainability, climate adaptation, the warehousing boom, managing forestry within the region in an appropriate manner to protect the water supply, the stormwater changes, acknowledging what what has to be done to appropriately plan for affordable housing within the region for the next round of affordable housing obligations that are coming up in 2025. And on a more light note, to understand that next year marks the 20th anniversary of the Highlands Act, and that it's time for us to take a good look back on where we've been successful, where we haven't been successful, but also to celebrate the forward-thinking, the forward-thinking policy that the Highlands Act represents. So let me just go through a couple of the things that I just mentioned, right? Agricultural sustainability is important because other than residential housing, agriculture is the single largest use of land in the region. It's an important part of the regional economy, but it's also an economic driver that's consistent with the regional master plan, right? It doesn't drive sprawl, doesn't impact the resources of the region. But we also have to recognize that prime agricultural soils are a resource of the region. No different than the water, no different than the forest, no different than the flora and the fauna of the region. We have to look at that as an important asset of the Highlands. It becomes more important when you start to put it into context, right? When you look at the overall climate resilience of the state, maintaining food production capacity in proximity to the large population centers on the East Coast is going to become increasingly important as we go forward. It's important now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now. It's going to look prescient that we maintain this production capacity, because we're still going to get adequate rainfall. We're going to have an extended growing season, but more than that, you have these prime agricultural soils with those conditions in place, with talented agricultural practitioners in ownership of those lands, in proximity to over 20 million people that live 2 hours or less from the Highlands, right? And it's consistent with the goals of the Highlands Act, trying to find ways to convert agricultural practices to 21st century practices, to understanding how to take advantage of that economic opportunity that those 20 million people with money in their pockets, who care about where their food was grown, who grew their food, how it was grown, and are willing to pay a premium for that food. If we don't do that, it's going to be a lost opportunity. Right? We have to look at climate impacts on the region, right? And what we know, we're seeing it now. It's only going to become crazier as we go forward, right? The extreme precipitation events. You saw it here in Warren County just this summer, right? And every year it seems that there's another insane event that we never thought we would see taking place. So we're going to continue to see extreme precipitation events. We're going to see intermittent droughts. All you have to do is think back to May and June of this year, where it looked like we were headed for a really serious drought that had, and it did, because of when it happened temporarily, it had an impact on agricultural practices in the region. And then from there, it went to seem like it just didn't stop raining for the next 3 months. Extreme temperature events, and the long-term considerations, like making sure that we have a water supply that's consistent with that. If you're one of those 70% of the people in New Jersey who rely on the Highlands for your drinking water, that when you turn on the tap, clean, safe drinking water is going to come out, regardless of whether or not we are in an extreme drought period, or an extreme high precipitation period, or if it's extremely hot out, right? Regardless of what those conditions are going to be, people are going to rely on the region to keep providing drinking water for them. Groundwater supplies, not just for the indigenous use of the Highlands, right? Most of the Highlands relies on groundwater wells for their drinking water within the region, but to make sure that groundwater is there to provide adequate ecological flows to the region. They're so important to the health of the rivers and streams of the region. The impacts on agriculture that climate change is going to bring, and the ecological disruptions that are going to happen. We also have to understand that there are both internal and external impacts that the climate will bring to the Highlands region. We look internally, right? Those precipitation swings, the increased flood hazard risks that we're going to see, the disruptions to agriculture and food production, the disruptions to forest health, both because of the extremes of heat, but the pests and diseases that will migrate northward into the region and impact the forests, and the depletion of groundwater that will have both an impact on internal drinking water supplies and on the ecological health of the region. Externally, I just went over some of what it's going to be, the reliability of that drinking water supply, but also the retention of floodwaters downstream from those extreme precipitation events, the local food supply, and temperature moderation, right? This resilience of the state depends upon the resilience of the highlands, right? And we give a lot of attention to the coastal areas of the state, and rightly so, right? Those are the dramatic impacts that people see. We all know from Hurricane Sandy what 15 feet of sea level rise actually looks like. And certainly it caught a lot of attention, and the impacts to the low-lying parts of the state do draw a lot of attention. But there are just as important impacts that are happening here in the Highlands that we have to plan for. Right? We came out with our warehouse guidance because we took a look at what was taking place, and the warehouse development was outpacing the ability of the towns to plan for. And there are certainly going to be locations within the Highlands that are going to be appropriate for warehouse development, right? But there are just as surely going to be places within the Highlands where warehousing is not the appropriate use. And we shouldn't let opportunity be the planner of the region. In fact, we can't afford to let opportunity be the planner of the region. We have to plan it intelligently. And that's why we came out with our warehouse guidance that built off the State Planning Commission's effort at trying to give guidance to where warehousing should go or shouldn't go. Right? And as I mentioned before, Route 80, Route 287, Route 78, proximity to the port of New York and New Jersey, which is the second busiest port in the country. They, right along with the demand for at-home shopping, right? They're all driving the warehouse needs. And again, while there are appropriate locations, there are inappropriate locations, mostly prime farmland that's at risk. And we want to be able to get ahead of this and make sure that we don't get eaten up by the warehouse demand. Right. So what we did was we took the State Planning Commission guidance and we put a Highland spin to it. We started to look at the resources of the region, the regional master plan, and how we said that the region needs to be planned. We looked at the location and the types of resources that were there, and tried to come up with guidance that was going to direct warehouse development to the places that can handle it and prevent it from taking place in places where it should. And mostly it's guided by the regional master plan, by the Highlands Act, and by the land use capability mapping that goes along with the Highlands Regional Master Plan that is based upon the existence or non-existence of resources and what it takes to protect them. This is the land use capability zone mapping for the region. Everything that you see in green or in brown or tan represents the important resources of the region. Green is the protection zone, which is really the forested lands and the wetlands. The browns and the tans are the agricultural lands of the region. And what we want to do is limit development or direct development away from those areas. The areas that are in yellow or orange are the existing community zones. Those are the places where large amounts of development have already taken place, where the infrastructure is in place, where the road networks and the rail networks and all the other infrastructure, electric, gas, water, sewer, all of those very expensive infrastructure features are already there. So development, not just warehouse development, but development of any type in the region should be limited to those portions of the region, because that's where we can best support it. And that's where we're not going to compromise the resources that characterize the region and that the rest of the state relies on. So what does the warehouse guidance say, right? It says, right, the Highlands is different, right? And we can't forget this. And we, again, go back, we tend to, it's kind of being lost to the memory hole a little bit. The Highlands is different. It's different for a reason. We have to treat it differently than the rest of the state. We can't use the same principles that we use for planning and developing the remainder of the state here, because we can't afford to. The state can't afford to. It's bad for the future of the state. We're compromising the sustainability and really the economic viability of the state's future if we don't heed this, right? So warehouses should not go in the conservation zone or the protection zone. They should not eat up prime forest land. They should avoid environmental features and avoid impacts of those features. And they should not go where infrastructure doesn't exist or it's limited. They can go in approved centers. They can go into the existing community zone. They can go where they're in geographic proximity to interstate highway interchanges. And they can go where places where there's access to other forms of goods movement like railroads. And they should go to locations where there is adequate existing infrastructure and where they can be supported without compromising the region's resources. This is, to me, right here, this map is one that when we were contemplating the warehouse guidelines, I asked our GIS staff to do this for us. This is impervious surface in the Highlands. This is probably one of the more alarming maps that I've seen come out of our shop. Everything that you see in green, both light green and dark green, represents watersheds or sub-watersheds within the region that have 10% less of impervious coverage. Why is that important? Because science tells us that once you exceed that 10% threshold, the waterways are going to be degraded to some extent, right? And keeping the waterways of the region in a well, I'm not going to say pristine, but in a non-impacted state is critical to the future of the resources and the future of the drinking water. Everything that's in green represents parts of sub-watersheds that are in that condition. Everything that's gray or darker gray are sub-watersheds that have exceeded that 10%. Dark gray is watersheds that have exceeded 25%. Those watersheds are degraded. They're not going back to being green. So my job is to make sure that as many of those, I shouldn't say that. My job is to make sure that none of those sub-watersheds that are in green ever go to being gray, and that we keep the watersheds that are in gray less than 25% so that they don't go to dark gray. And if you look at it, the average sub-watershed is about 5,000 acres. One large warehouse development could put down about 50 acres of impervious coverage between the building, the roadways, the parking areas, all the support infrastructure that goes along with it. Just do the math. One development represents 1% of the watershed. That 10% allocation isn't 10% going off into the future. That's 10% forever. You may have some of those green watersheds that are at 9%. One warehouse development could put them over the limit from 9% to 10%. And as I said, they're not going back once you get there. So if we're going to be spending 1% of your 10% budget on a particular warehouse development, you better make sure it's worth it. You better make sure it's appropriately located. You better make sure that it's not going to compromise other types of resources. So that alone should be alarming to anyone who's looking at there's a lot more at stake than just a single warehouse development, right? So overall, what we're looking at, impervious coverage on a sub-watershed basis, we require you to do a traffic analysis. We're looking at site coverage, trying to cluster warehouse developments in the places where they can exist. At the utility capacity, we're making sure that a large part, particularly in the southwestern part of the region, is underlain by limestone and karst topography, which makes not only they're places where you have prime groundwater recharge, but they're also very challenging in managing stormwater, because injecting stormwater into the karst topography can cause sinkholes and cause other problems. We're looking at landscaping and buffers, making sure that we're not introducing non-native species into the landscaping plans, making sure access to the site is appropriate, that lighting is appropriate, stormwater management is done right, looking at the air, heat, noise impacts, looking at the impacts to overburdened communities, of which there are many within the Highlands, looking at the energy requirements and the loading requirements, making sure the green infrastructure is incorporated into the design, making sure the building standards are appropriate, that they're solar ready, making sure that they're not storing hazardous materials in close proximity to waterways, that truck routing is there. And this is one that rarely gets a lot of attention. Understand that the warehousing boom now is likely temporary, and making sure that there's a decommissioning plan for these sites once that they're built. Right? So those are the major things that we've undertaken. Like I said, I've really feel like I've waded into some crazy policy areas some days, but they're all necessary. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if I hadn't gone into some of these more difficult areas. We have an incredible staff who has taken on the responsibilities that they've been given with a lot of enthusiasm, but really bringing a lot of intelligence and expertise to this. They're there working hard to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the future of the region and for the future of the state. So with that, I'll leave my presentation, and I'll open it up to any questions you might have about what I just said, or what you might have wanted me to say.
I wasn't aware that the Highlands extended to all those other states. Do Do you interact with any of those states? Yes.
Some, right? Like in next 2 weeks from now, we're gonna have a Highlands Summit where representatives from all 4 states will get together up in Mawa, and we will talk about it, right? New Jersey, the interesting thing is New Jersey is the only one of those 4 states that has taken aggressive measures to protect the resources. The rest of those states have left it up to their environmental regulations and their open space acquisition programs, but they have not taken the comprehensive planning effort that we've done here in New Jersey to heart and applied it there.
It's highly unlikely that the legislation would ever be opened up again. Do you have enough legislation in place to do what you have to do?
No, right? That's right. No, I mean, in a word, I think that one of the things, right, and that's too short an answer, Bill, because one of the things that I think the Highlands Act itself, for the shortcomings that it has, was also forward thinking. And what happened is we don't use it to the greatest extent that we can. The only thing that is voluntary in the Highlands Act is for a planning area municipality to have that portion of the town not be mandated to conform to the regional master plan. They can voluntarily do it. We can put incentives in place that would make it worth their while. I actually think that better planning itself is an incentive for them to do it. But here's the flip side of it. It is mandatory for the state agencies to respect the Highlands master plan, regardless of whether or not you're dealing with the planning area or the preservation area. And that's got to come from leadership at the top. They've got to have, we can't allow the state agencies to each go their own way, right? They've got to be told that when you make a permitting decision, when you make an infrastructure decision, whenever you do anything that's related to planning or investment in the region, that it's got to be conforming with the regional master plan, right? And that I think is in place. We need a dedicated source of funding for open space. We need the state's environmental regulations to take that to heart. What I just said, that the Highlands is the Highlands, right? And that those permitting decisions have to be made with that in mind. And to that end, like I said, I would love to see the planning area, preservation area divide be done away with. But even if it's not, the mandate is there for the state to behave in a manner that knows that there's, right? Because if you look at that land use capability zone, there is plenty of protection area or conservation area within the planning area of the Highlands. It's not all existing community.
Can you give any specifics of where the state has been a bad actor?
Well, I don't know about bad, but like originally the WQMP process, which dictates where source service goes or doesn't go, was required to take the Highlands Act into account regardless of whether it was the planning area or the preservation area. During the Christie administration, that rule was changed to roll back that requirement in the planning area. And so only the preservation area was subject to the right. And we know that is probably the most important permitting action, because that dictates where intense development can go or can't go.
Question from virtual, from Alan: does the warehouse guidance apply to unconformed municipalities in the planning area?
I would say, right, it does, right? I think that right, it should. I think that if you are an advocate from the outside looking at a planning decision that's inconsistent with both the regional master plan, right? Because here it is. You can say, I don't have to conform my town to the Highlands. But if I'm planning the town, ignoring the science that underlies the regional master plan, to me, takes you into the arbitrary, unreasonable, or capricious status, right? Where you're not taking into account the underlying science that tells you how you should be planning your town, right? And if you were to match up our land use capability zones with the state plan, you're going to find very little deviation. You're going to find that the existing community zone probably aligns very closely with planning areas 1 and 2. And you're going to find that the conservation and protection areas line up very closely with planning areas 4, 4B, or 5, right? So a town that is not using that information to plan itself is simply not doing its job appropriately. And what the warehouse guidance provides is an interpretation of that planning information on how to apply it to make good, sound decisions. And if you're not listening to it, you are not making good, sound decisions. That's a tough message for a lot of municipalities, but it's the reality of it. You're making a bad decision if you're not taking this information into account. And any planner worth his salt, any planner who earned their planning degree, who doesn't understand that and isn't advocating for that with the towns that have hired them, is not doing their job. And that's just a fact. And again, I know that's tough language, but that's a fact.
And who's got the power to tell the state agencies to follow the
Governor's office. Every governor, right? We have one of the most powerful governor's positions in the country, right? The governor of New Jersey is a powerful position, almost as powerful as a man, right? But that's the kind of thing where we have to, right? And part of that is where we've allowed the urgency or the recognition of the importance of the region to be lost to the memory hole, right? It's not rocket science to figure this out, right? It's been demonstrated why it's important. We've known, right? The Highlands has been recognized as an important environmental area since the 1800s, right? I've got a map hanging on my wall at home from 1888, the New Jersey Highlands, right? And the Newark set aside its watershed in the late 1800s because they understood it. Jersey City did it. Lots of towns across the Highlands did it. This is nothing new. What is new is the importance of putting that paramount and allowing it to inform the planning of the state as a whole, and understanding that ignoring it is compromising the economic, environmental, and social stability and sustainability of the state in the long term.
So is Murphy going to do that?
I'm asking him every day.
We've also heard that apparently vacancies in the board that he hasn't seen fit to make the appointments yet.
So, right, we're going to be down to 10 members on December 15th. When Bob Holtaway has announced his resignation at the meeting just last Thursday, going to take us down to 10 members. We need 8 votes to pass anything, even to pass the minutes from the last meeting. All right, and if two members are absent and one member didn't attend the meeting before, guess what? We're not even passing the minutes.
Change the bylaws? I'm serious. That's what little organizations like us do that all the time. Can your bylaws be changed?
I don't think so.
How much interaction do you have with Murphy?
I have a representative in the governor's office who I have a weekly phone call with. Right, that's my contact with the governor's inner staff. Right, I provide them with updates. I provide them with detailed evaluations of the state of the Highlands. I gave it to them when I was in the job for a month to tell them what I saw when I came in. I just finished up my first year. I gave them a very detailed, very direct, very pointed evaluation of where we are after a year.
About direct contact.
Trying to get through, right? That's where I have to get to.
I thought he was supposed to be an environmentalist.
That's a good question.
Speak everything to everyone.
Well, here's the thing. The overall, right? The overall policies in the state tend towards the environmental, right? The bigger picture policies. But that's where we're at. What we do with the Highlands is the nuts and bolts of government, right? It's the real nasty, dirty work of where the rubber meets the road. Right, and right, it's not the kind of thing that lends itself to a press opportunity, right? It's not a big initiative like investing, millions of dollars into electrifying the vehicle fleet, and those are all good things. Don't get me wrong; those are important things for us to do for the long term. But as Bill and I were talking just before, these things that are designed to have an impact on reducing our impact on the climate over a long period of time are all important to do right now, but the benefits of those things are not going to be seen because we've already charged the atmosphere with 200 years worth of warming, and we have to react to the things that are coming down the pike at us right now. A lot of the things that I just talked about in my presentation, and that's again, those are the unsexy things of governing, but they are the important things of government, right? It's the nuts and bolts of how things get done and how good policy gets made, but more importantly, how good policy gets implemented.
Do you remain optimistic after a year in the job?
I wouldn't be in this job if I wasn't optimistic, right? And there are days, trust me, there are And then that one day can be both, right? There are days when I come in, I'm very optimistic. There are days when I come in and it's very frustrating. But again, and that can change, right? Depending upon who I talk to in my office or whether the sun's shining or not.
There's so many things I'd like to ask you, but just one. I was at some of the early public hearings for the act, and back then, maybe still now, there was tremendous, this resistance to it. And I'm wondering, look, I've been away from it for a while. Does that resistance still exist? Are you still getting yelled at ShopRite? And what have we learned for the future on how to minimize? How can we have done better, and what have we learned to try to minimize the resistance? So as much as possible, we're on the same page.
Those are big questions, right? There's still resistance at the local level with municipalities that feel they don't want to give up their local home rule, and they're still out there. But towns that have worked with us and towns that have conformed with the Highlands Regional Master Plan have found that working with us is a really good experience. And number two, that we can take a lot off of their plates and make their lives a lot easier, that we provide tremendous resources, both financial and technical, for them to make their jobs easier. There's still landowners out there who are mad about the loss of equity, and that's why I'm fighting so hard to try to get a dedicated source of funding so I can address some of that. But an interesting thing that's happened, and this is relevant here where we're sitting here tonight, Warren County has come around to understanding that the Highlands is to their benefit. When you ask the Warren County commissioners, what do you think about the Highlands? Like, they've come around to understanding that the goals of the Highlands are pretty much consistent with the goals of what they want to see the county be over the long term. And I had an interesting, right? They're actually really, really good people. The three people on the commissioner board are decent people. And I had a long conversation with one, and I won't say who, where I said, Ben, I get it. The Highlands isn't going away. What can you do to help us? What can we use you for? Right. And that was before I took this job. It's when I was working on the Grow Warren project, right? And they understood agriculture is a big part of the future of the economy of the region. Use what they can to promote it, right? Will they ever accept it fully? Probably not. Right, it's New Jersey, right? We're very jealous of our control, right? But they've come around in a lot of different ways, and there are only things that are going to happen that are right: stormwater management, the warehousing boom, affordable housing policy. That there are going to be a number of different things. There are going to be tremendous challenges at both the county and the local levels that are going to drive them towards understanding that it's in their best interest to work with us.
Question related to affordable housing. A lot of affordable housing developments are proposed on farmland. What tools does the council have to help small towns find alternative affordable housing solutions that don't rely on builders' remedy developments with only around 20% affordable provision, and can work to find affordable housing in existing town footprints, such as in Hampton?
So that goes back to the core premise of what I'm talking about. The Highlands is different, right? We can't use the same methodologies of projecting build out. We can't use the same methodologies of meeting affordable housing obligations in the Highlands that we do in the remainder of the state. The builder's remedy methodology, right, where you have a 1 to 5 ratio, right? You're generating 4 market rate units for every affordable unit that you create. Not just that, but we're creating those units on farmland that we don't want to lose, in places where there is no mass transportation, in places where there are no walkable communities, in places where jobs are a long way away, that they're automobile dependent developments, right? That's not the way, right? And that tend to try to spread out the population of the state like peanut butter on a slice of bread. And we know that's not sustainable for the long term. It's not sustainable economically. It's not sustainable environmentally. It's not sustainable socially. So what we have to do is understand that the obligation for affordable housing is not going to go away, not in the Highlands, not anywhere in the state. But understanding that, we have to pay particular attention to 2 things: what the overall responsibility is going to be for each municipality, and making sure that the number that they're obliged to provide is in line with what the build out of the region tells you it should be, and how we build it. Are we building through inclusionary development, or are we paying attention to converting existing homes? Or are we using 100% affordable developments? Are we doing mixed use where we use residential over retail as a methodology of doing that? And are we availing ourselves of all the other ways of meeting our affordable housing obligation in the region before we go to a builder's remedy solution? That should be the last option that we use.
Since the courts are very much involved in the entire affordable housing issue, can you imagine the courts would be listening to that argument?
They should, Bill, and they should have done it during the third round settlements that went in place. The Highlands should have been at the table for all 88 Highlands municipalities when those settlements were being reached, when the resolution was being reached. The Highlands was absent from the discussion, and the planning imperatives of the Highlands were absent from the discussion. That's, to me, that's one of the most destructive things that took place in the last 10 years. We did an analysis where we looked at the affordable housing settlements that were reached during the third round and compared them to the calculated build-outs for those municipalities. In over half of the Highlands municipalities, the affordable units alone equaled or exceeded the overall build-out of the municipality, in some cases by 100 to 125%. Meaning that if you even had a fraction of those units being built using the builder's remedy methodology, you were going to blow through the build outs by 300, 400, 500%. That's simply not right. How do you serve both meeting the affordable housing obligation in that manner and still ensure that the region can provide safe, reliable, clean drinking water to 70% of the state at the same time? Those two things don't match up. Right. And all we have, right, that doesn't take a lot of deep analysis to figure that out. We have to figure out how to meet an affordable housing obligation and understand that it doesn't necessarily only mean moving people into the Highlands, which I think is a bad idea because we have no understanding of what the carrying capacity of the region is. Right. 800,000, right? I look, the Pinelands, special place, great place to plan and make sure it's preserved, but nobody lives in the Pinelands. It's an exaggeration. Some people live there, but comparatively, nobody lives there. We have to have the same kind of effort to protect the resources of the Highlands in a place where 800,000 people already live. We don't know what the sustainable carrying capacity of the region is. Hopefully, it's more than 800,000, because if we've already exceeded it, we've created a long-term problem for ourselves. But I can tell you one thing, it's not a million. Right. And until we understand that, putting in place measures that could trigger development that would put us more towards that million than towards the 800,000 is irresponsible. Right. And we have an indigenous affordable housing need within the region that has to be met. Right. There's no doubt that we have a housing affordability problem in this state. Right. How we solve it is one of the challenges of our generation. But I can tell you one thing is, putting another 200,000 people into the Highlands is not the responsible way of solving.
Now, there's a round coming up for 2025. You anticipate being at the table?
We are, and that's one of the things that we're doing right now is we're running the land use capability zone map again to make sure that it's accurate. We're going to rerun our build out projections for the region, and we're going to make sure that both the land use capability zones and the build out projections inform whatever resolution, right? Because they're not always going to be settlements. Whatever resolution to the affordable housing obligation would be, ideally, the towns will take the information that we give them and work in conjunction with us and plan appropriately. And planning appropriately means planning the right number, putting them in the right location, and building them in the right way. All three of those questions have to be answered with the correct answer. Right?
You have allies in that discussion? Because
sure.
What you're doing essentially is forcing the affordable housing requirement to other communities outside.
And that's, but that's what, like, the Highlands is different.
Right. Yeah.
And right, until we acknowledge that, right, we're going to say, we're going to build all these affordable units. Where are the people going to get their drinking water from? Or we're going to look at, right, even looking at it from an environmental justice standpoint, we are making sacrifices in the Highlands to reduce people's equity in their land, to say we're not going to have development, to put a tax burden on the residents of the region to make investments to make sure that the drinking water supply is always going to be there. Where's that drinking water supply going to? It's going to the urban areas of the state. We have to realize that we are in this together, right? That there are things that the urban areas of the state provide that are of extreme value to the people who live in the rural areas of the state, and that there are things in the rural area of the state that are of extreme value to the people who live in the urban areas of the state. And until we come to that realization, or until we come to the conclusion that we're in this together and that we have to manage this together for a mutual benefit, we're always going to be in these kinds of petty arguments over, oh, you get the obligation, you don't, or you're doing it right, or even worse, that there are ulterior motives that are ascribed to the places where we know that we shouldn't be building, saying it's not because it's smart for the future of the state, it's because you don't want to have that kind of development within your community. No, sometimes the answer is that kind of development is irresponsible to put in that community, and it's for your benefit to make sure that we don't do it. Right? That's all. That's in reality, that's not all that complicated a concept to reach, but politically it becomes a much more difficult solution to resolve.
State plan is being bunk about right now. Are you engaged in that?
We are, right? I mean, basically, we're in a good place with the state plan. The state plan, the Highlands has been recognized as a special resource in the state plan for 20, 30 years now, right? And we're losing track of time, right? It's been there for 30 years. And the Highlands Act going into place and the Highlands Regional Master Plan being evaluated and endorsed by the State Planning Commission gives it that added validity. And again, what I talked about before about the state agencies being obligated to follow the Highlands Regional Master Plan, my legal argument is that the Highlands Act required it in the first place. But now that it's been endorsed by the state planning agency, that's another level of legitimacy to forcing those other state agencies to respecting the regional master plan.
You mentioned the karst limestone geology, and I'm just wondering, does DEP recognize the importance of it?
They do, you know, but it's not raised to the level that we do, right? It's a recognized resource within the Highlands Regional Master Plan. There are no special accommodations given to it in the DEP rules and regulations, but it is, when you're working in the Highlands, it's something that they have to recognize, both for stormwater, for wastewater, and for drinking water.
As I was reading it, the work they were doing on 78 in the Pennsylvania border was due to the sinkholes being built over.
Right. And that's right. That's right. We're trying. Right. It's always we're always going to be imperfect, particularly when we're trying to project the future. But being imperfect doesn't mean being blind to things either. Right. And so we have to put as many of these things in front of decision makers to make sure that they're fully informed when they make those decisions. Right. So that we do our best to make as many of the, thank God they were thinking of that decisions, and as few of the, what were those idiots thinking decisions.
Ben, you support a water tax?
You know, which that's a hard, right? I can support it because I'm never running for office again. But yes, when you think about it, it's such a simple way to fund the protection of the land in an almost invisible manner. A modest tax, like $5 on a water bill a year, what that would generate from 9 million people, right? You think about what you can do with that, the financial projections you can make, the long-term financing decisions you can make, the bonding you can do with that, to both address things like land preservation, to address infrastructure, maintenance and upgrades, right? All those things can be done so simply, and it gives a good relationship between the consumer and the protection of the resource that they consume. Makes sense, right? Just makes sense.
How to make it happen?
Why did we fight for it 20 years ago?
Right? It's good, really good question. I don't know. I can't answer that one, other than politically taxing water seemed like a terrible thing to do at the time.
It's like a carbon tax. Sooner or later, we're going to need it.
Right?
We want to fight for it.
You have to grow up and understand, right? It's part of living in the most dense part, right? I can go find places that are cheaper to live, right? 9 million people were not sentenced to live in New Jersey. Right? They're not living here because it's a terrible place. I did something really wrong and they live in New Jersey. Right? It doesn't work that way. There are a lot of good things about living here. affordability is one of the tougher ones, right? But yet we do sustain a population of 9 million people who want to live here, aren't right. It isn't because they can't escape the state, but there are obligations that come with the infrastructure and the education system and all the other things, transportation system, all the things that we have to make sure that are in place so that 9 million people can live here and still enjoy a high quality of life.
Well, that came up today in the strategic plan that there aren't any houses. There's no place for people to move in.
Well, and a lot of that is about, right, is that true or isn't it? Do we have the capacity to build more in the places where infrastructure exists, right? Where we have the support necessary to be able to take care of a dense population, right? And the interesting thing is, and this was, I felt like it was the state plan come to life back in 2016 when Rutgers did the latest demographic study of the state, and they found that Hunterdon, Warren, Sussex County were actually losing population, and Hudson, Essex, Bergen County, Brooklyn, New York City, right? The core places of our urban areas were gaining population because that's where the demographics and the demand were going to. Now, there are a lot of things that, right, there are a lot of other issues that brings up, like gentrification and affordability, right? It's always like whack-a-mole of where the problems are going to exist. But until the pandemic came along, we were starting to see 3 or 4 decades of smart growth policies come to life, right? Making our investments where they needed to be, right? Making sure that we discourage the things we can't handle for the long term and encourage the things that we can, right? And we were there, right? And I think once the impact of the pandemic passes, we'll go back to that because that's certainly where the trend was. I said before, I used to, when I was working at in the office of smart growth, right? I had a map of New Jersey from the 1880s, and I put it up and say, you know what this is? This is center-based, transit-oriented development. Every town was connected by a railroad. People lived near where they worked, lived near where their food came from, right? Traveled using mass transit. That was New Jersey for 250 years of its 300-year existence. It was in a very short window of our existence that we went crazy and lost sight of the importance of that. And now we're getting back to understanding the importance of that.
Couple more virtual questions. How do you think about the role of nonprofits such as the MWA in achieving the objectives of the Highlands Council?
Well, it's important, right? The Highlands, right? I've got a staff of 23 people. I need 4 more if anybody's listening and wants to help me advocate for that. But I have a very limited staff with as talented as they are, as smart as they are. Their capacity and their ability to do things that are core to the implementation of the regional master plan are limited. A lot has to rely on partners, right? And the MWA is one of those partners, whether it's doing things like stream monitoring, data collection, or working with the towns within your service area to do better planning and encouraging on the ground to avail themselves of the resources that we do have that they can obtain and to do things in a smarter way. Right. And even small, right, just small things like making people aware of the importance of the protection of the watershed to the overall quality of life within your service area are important. So that there are a lot of things that the local, and this is not a small nonprofit. You guys cover nearly a quarter of the towns in the region. Right. And so the impact that the Musconetcong Watershed Association can have in working with those towns can go a long way towards making my job a lot easier and a lot more impactful.
So I think, Ben, one of the things we are blessed with, I would say, is an abundance of water in the Highlands. I don't know if that's true. I believe it. So for me, there's been that deficit. I keep hearing that for over years in areas, but overall production of water availability is why it goes to use because of the abundance. The future for me and in New Jersey, what we have is the impact of that water, right? Where things are showing up now, traveling through the karst connection of underground water, of contamination, PFAS, some of those things. Have you been doing any work on reuse of the water? We take it out of the ground one time, and then we dump it into the streams and it goes away.
No, and a lot, it's a great question. A lot of that is downstream decision making, right? We produce it, but it goes outside of our region, outside of where we can control. You're right. There are lots of sub watersheds within the region that are in deficit, primarily because we're extracting water from those watersheds and shipping it out, right? And some of it's
some transfers.
yeah, interbasin transfer. Some of it is just high volume production wells, places like the Morris MUA. They're taking a tremendous amount of water out of the Almaton aquifer, right? And so that changes the balance. But overall, we're still reliably going to get 50 inches of rain, even with climate change, and understanding that we have to manage that water better. We have to do a better job of the long-term management. And what you just mentioned, a lot of that is downstream. Although I will say that a drop of water that falls in the upper Passaic River Basin probably is consumed and put back into the water, withdrawn again, and put back in the water. And we know what that means, right? Right? It's being taken out by water intakes, put back in by sewage treatment plants, right? 4 or 5 times before that drop of water reaches our bed, right? And you don't want to always think about drinking water like that, but it's the reality of it, right? Yeah. It's all connected.
That's all the more reason to keep track of impervious coverage, because the more impervious coverage you have, the less that sub watershed is able to replenish through infiltration in the ground.
And that's why it was so important. We had never really run an analysis like that until we started looking at the warehouse issue.
I got another virtual. I just want to get in there. Heard from a county planning official, they need to understand the wastewater capacity limits in order to update population projections for their master plan. But not all municipalities can access sewer systems with wastewater treatment plants. Some dense, small communities like Hampton and Bloomsbury rely on septic, and some communities are very rural and dispersed. What do you think communities in the Musconetcong watershed should be doing for wastewater planning?
I don't know. All right. And the reason I say it is I just had this conversation with the folks at DEP, because to me, that's one of the essential questions that we have to be able to answer. It's a bad idea to be extending. First of all, it's expensive. Secondly, it runs contrary to planning principles for the region. But extending infrastructure into the rural areas of the Highlands is probably a bad idea, because it enables high density development where you really, for a lot of other planning reasons, you don't want it to take place. That being said, we have existing communities, and you just mentioned a couple of them. We'll go not just in the Musconetcong watershed, but you go over to the Round, look at California, right? Or look at Chesterborough. You have these small historic centers that have been there for hundreds of years, have been densely developed, are centers of commerce and population. And you have you don't just have septic systems, you have cesspools and cesspits in these places.
Hell yeah.
And trying to figure out how to handle wastewater responsibly is an incredibly difficult problem to solve, right? We're looking at, right now we're trying to target some of them, like Califon, like Chesterborough, like Bloomsbury, right? And say, what can we, and when we come up with a solution, it will be applicable to Glen Gardner and Hampton and every other small little town that you have that's reliant, and really looking at the overall impact on water quality, right? Where's that going? It's going right into the rivers. So trying to figure out alternatives to it in a place where you don't have the ratepayer base to be able to afford to put that infrastructure in place, where you don't have the land base to be able to appropriately dispose of even treated wastewater, right? This is not an easy question, but it's one that we have to take head on because it's so important to the future of the region.
For Tom and Richard, would Ben be familiar with Ed Clerico and his work? Is that relevant here?
I might know Mr. Clerico.
I figured you did, but if it didn't come in yet, I wasn't sure.
But they may or may not. Evans Foundation gave us a grant to actually look at wastewater issues. And so we've asked ENLP to put together a report for us.
So that was a loaded question, right? That was a short question.
That's forthcoming. I've been working with Peg and others on distributed water infrastructure. He just presented work at the WEF conference in Chicago, International Conference on water environmental issues. We're looking towards the end of the year of actually coming out with materials to start working with municipalities. We'd love to partner with you on that and your staff on that and find opportunities. Our water quality monitoring is focusing on some of these key areas. We anticipate in the next 6 months to a year to actually have data be able to show that water quality has degraded in large part because of humans.
I don't need to be Karnak, right? But what are the results of those studies going to tell me? Water quality has been degraded, right? Right.
Except that 20 years ago,
Yeah.
our 319 plan showed it was agricultural
Yeah.
applications. And now we have substantive data starting to show it's human interventions.
And we know, right, we know that that's going to be the case. And so we've got to get to the technology is catching up that we can treat wastewater pretty well. That when, right, you might know that, Richie. A little bit, yeah. Right? That we could do a pretty good job of treating wastewater, but it's the other things that really make it more difficult. It's the having the available land. It's the investment. It's right. How do you do the hookups? It's the permitting process, right? We have to have all those things catch up with the technology to be able to do it right.
I was at a reunion of DEP people yesterday, 2 days ago. And at the end of it, because I was there for a long time, and I said, they were all alumni, and I said, what scares you going forward? And one answer was climate change, the other answer was PFAS. He doesn't think that we're treating PFAS sufficiently.
No, it's really difficult.
Microplastics, the presentation was done here, it was very scary.
It's everywhere.
Yeah,
right. And I don't want to put this out there too much, but right, think about the fact that that PFAS is everywhere in every water source, that we're even irrigation water, right? That it gets into the food supply for that. I don't know what the answer is, right? I don't know where how we're going to financially handle that, or technically handle that going forward. Again, these are right. Every time we turn around, there's another problem. We're still dealing with the base problems that led to the passage of the Highlands Act, trying to catch up with it to the point where we can do the job that we were given in 2004. Now we got all these other things that we have to take care of. I agree. It's kind of scary to figure out how we're going to deal with it.
But focusing on the wastewater issue in particular, and you had mentioned water quality management planning, wastewater planning, in particular DEP. You had mentioned context of warehousing, but also affordable housing. Is the Highlands Council being asked to comment on water quality management plan amendments? And if so, what's your process?
Only in the preservation area. It goes back to what I was talking about the WQMP rule. We should be commenting on all of it. And what we've done since I've been there is we're starting to comment on all of it now. So we have our science staff will take a look at them when they refer to us. We will comment on them regardless of whether or not they're in the planning area or the preservation area. DEP is only required their rule only requires us to comment on the preservation area, but I say that they've got to listen to us both in the preservation or the plan.
Is it possible I should comment on those in the Musconetcong Watershed?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
to have that information.
I mean, you gotta pay attention to right. They all come out in the register, right? And you gotta stay on top of this.
Well, that's what I figured. You've got the staff.
Yes.
Everybody could help them go through.
I don't have, unfortunately, I don't have the sufficient staff that we need, but that's one of the things that we've taken on.
I think it's important for the audience to know that Highlands Council just went through a process without going through their planning process, in particular in the warehousing. I don't know what happened, but what I saw seemed a really interesting and productive effort where both the town of Alpha and Highlands Council seemed very pleased with the results of working together, finding solutions and collaborating.
Yeah, it wasn't important because we did do a comprehensive look at Alpha Borough. We looked at all their planning, not just planning for a single warehouse development. We looked at the entire community planning. We looked at their infrastructure. We looked at trying to build a walkable, livable downtown for them. We also did something innovative that because the development in their industrial park involved the loss of prime farmland, we required that the developer pay for the cost of the loss of that resource so that we could then preserve farmland somewhere else. And that's a model that we want to use throughout the Highlands, that whenever prime agricultural soil is being lost to a warehouse development, that it be compensated for, not that that it's a good idea to trade it off, but it still has to meet all the other requirements. It has to be properly located. The infrastructure has to be in place. It has to be near a interstate highway interchange. All the other factors that we consider have to be in place. But if they're in place and it entails we're gonna say, okay, you can do it, but you gotta pay us for farmland so we can preserve more farm.
Is that like the farm behind the Phillipsburg Mall? Because there's a proposal for the mall to become a
I
warehouse.
can't really comment on that publicly, but yes, we are gonna apply the same principles for
Because
that.
I live in that township, so I was at the meeting and I didn't know anything at the time, I just looked at the proposal and I said, this is groundwater recharge, it's all stuff, so.
We are gonna-
listen to that thinking.
Right, and I don't wanna get too deep. Not just because that, but we're obliged to prior decisions that were made, you know, a long time ago by the Highlands that I have to buy.
Sure.
Right, that maybe I would have approached it a little differently, but they are what they are, right? And so we're gonna try to apply these principles to every development going forward, including that.
So it's a hybrid TDR with a FAR. That's combined.
Exactly.
Horse trading.
Right, I can't get a real viable TDR program going, so I've got to come up with what essentially is a pseudo TDR.
Does your funding depend on the legislature or the governor or who?
It depends on the legislature, it depends on my operating budget depends on the governor making the recommendations. Ultimately, budgeting decisions are made by the legislature, but being informed by the budget that the governor prepares. So the governor can recommend an increase in our budget, legislature has to accept it. The grant programs that we have are dedicated through the Highlands Protection Fund that comes from a portion of the realty transfer tax. But that's only $2.1 million a year, and that goes directly out to municipalities in the form of planning grants that they use. Operating costs, things when I want to do something different, like this agricultural grant, I had to pull some real crazy budget gymnastics to be able to make them available to go to somebody other than a municipality for a purpose other than municipal planning, municipal or county planning. But it was so important to be able to stake a claim into the notion that we are supportive of agriculture in the region, that we think it's important for the future of the region. So we made $500,000 available to the agricultural sector.
One of those grants went to North Jersey RCND to enhance the river friendly program. And part of that is a subcontract MWA, actually work with them to work with farmers to find more farms who are under the river friendly program and to identify those farms that could be preserved that haven't been preserved. So we thank you for that.
And ultimately, I thank you for it, because ultimately that goes to with my 23 people on my staff. I can't do this, right? That's stuff that we would like to be able to do in-house, but I can't. So I get other people to do my dirty work for me.
We're willing to do more dirty work.
Right.
So you just got done saying you don't have enough people, but I'm gonna ask this question just so anyone listening can know, is the Highlands Council designed to have direct engagement with residents? Or is there another way for people to kind of interface with the decisions you guys make and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Yeah, look, like all public, positions, we have to be open to the public, right? We have to allow people to engage us, to comment, come to our meetings, submit written comments, make suggestions, good, bad, indifferent, right? Right, that's part of public life. That being said, because of our limited capacity, we have very limited capabilities of actually going out and engaging. We do the best. Hopefully, we're doing the best that we can, right? Because we want to, right? We're not here to be non-responsive. We're not here to be. I'm from the government. I'm here to help you. Although we are. I mean, we are, but the capacity that we have to be able to meaningfully engage is necessarily limited to written comments, people who come to our meetings for a particular purpose, and even then, it's limited that we really can't have a productive interaction at those meetings. So
you can get your few minutes, yeah.
You get your 3 minutes. We hear what you have to say, and it's just not practical to have a back and forth. So. This is actually great. I know you like having me here. I like being here too, because it's one of the ways that I can actually engage the interested public. And that's part of what comes with the job.
You have somebody on staff that does PR stuff?
I do. she's good, but yeah, again, they're very, we have a lot of, one person with a lot of demands on.
You had that previous career at Greener by Design. Were they up on some of the ideas about how to do development in a much greener way, how to do water in a much friendlier way, involving buildings, involving development, involving farms? And are we taking enough advantage of those kind of ideas?
We were, but our clients were not always in line with what we thought they should be doing. And yes, I mean, look, that's the whole, we talk about different ways of meeting your affordable housing obligation, right? Reusing sites, doing things that we're going to use innovative wastewater technology so that you're not building 100 units to get 20 affordable units. You're building 20 affordable units and designing them right, making them livable, making them attractive, making them fit in with the town. The end result is still the same as far as your affordable housing obligation goes. The overall impact on the region is greatly reduced, right? So those are just, right, that's one of the concepts. But getting better building techniques, you got a guy sitting right here who lives it, right? Those are the kinds of things that we want to be able to encourage going forward. We're necessarily limited by the engagement, right? We can put these ideas out. We're limited by the engagement that the municipalities want to have with us and their willingness to implement them.
There's no problem on the demand side. More people have to ask for these things.
Yes.
But what about ideas like, living buildings? They're not so new anymore. That there's zero emissions leaving the facility or the property.
That's right. That's all the right. That's building code, that's zoning code, right? And that's being and in some ways it's an economic policy because if we could subsidize that right and make it more and that's a tough one because you want the market to drive a lot of that too, right? And so it's hard to figure out. Yeah, it does, right? But clearly that's got to come really down to the building codes and what we're going to require.
Yeah, I mean, we've been through the journey, straw bale housing, support of the ag, and can we do that? And you run into the code issues. And the biggest key that Ben said, if it isn't accepted by the market, then you're not going anywhere.
I can't tell my students when I go teach tomorrow, I can't tell them there's no hope.
No, there is hope, but it takes time and it takes innovation. It takes all the partners and it takes risk of capital to go out to see if the market will accept some of this. Yeah, and the influence of technology, which is changing all the time, right? Wastewater was driven really, from my perspective, on the water treatment side, was driven by the space program. Keep people in space extended period of times. The filtering and the technology took a huge leap. And now we're starting to see some of those things. But the old plants were built in the floodplain, right?
Yep. Because of the environmental water, right?
They're dump it loose. So it's markets, it's technology, it's all those things, but it's a risk to go out to say we're going to do something. It's easy to say, let's just leave it as farmland. The farmland, all land was farmland to start. So you can make the argument if you're a purist, right, that nothing should be built anywhere. But how do you make that balance? And a municipality is afraid of the economics and how they survive and their mandate for property tax, right? And the schools and the affordable housing. And land is the only thing they have to create revenue. And the farmers, when they were mad about, right, the Highlands, they felt like the loss of equity. So the challenge, and I'm so happy that people like Tom and like our staff and Ben have taken on those big questions, and they are big questions and they have big risks with them. Politics sometimes doesn't flow well with risk, and democracy, if there are 100 people to the east, say to the 20 people in the west, this is what you're going to get. That's how it works. And we have to find a way for the market and the innovation. And it's integrated. It's an integrated problem, and it takes integrated solutions.
Well, it is. You got to have a systems approach, and that goes to everything, right? And a lot like what I was talking about. Look, it took us 40 years of dedicated smart growth policy before we started to see the trends shift. And so we've got to bring kind of the weight of intellect and policy and investment and start getting it going in that direction. And then we'll see real change, not just one-offs.
We don't have 40 years anymore.
Give you a sneak peek, the 2020 flyover data. It's going to be released soon. Folks who are doing that at Rowan University as part of the statewide contract going through, but advised us that they're seeing real evidence that the state plan actually had an impact to the developments happening going through. And so the next set of data is going to be very important, not only for the state, but also for the.
Like I said, the only thing, I think that we had gotten the currents were going in the right direction until the pandemic hit. And then you had this spike in demand for suburban rural housing, where people weren't tied to where they work physically anymore. And they chose to move out of the denser areas. But now that that's passing, people are going back. Once they get out here, it's dark out there. Wait, what do you mean I gotta drive? I gotta drive 10 miles to go to the shop, right? Right, that's gonna have an impact, and then we're gonna return to the trend.
I just want to say we're about at 8:30. Please give Ben a round of applause. A couple of minutes for some questions. One final question I wanted to ask is, all the time municipal officials are turning over, mayor, township committee, town council. A lot of them coming in, maybe you've never even heard of the Highlands Council. So, what's one or two things you wish every new incoming municipal official could know about the Highlands Council, what you can do for them, and how they can get involved or get in touch with you?
So that first of all, the planning principles that we promote that are part of the regional master plan are appropriate for their town as well, right? That we're not telling people, right? If you were to look at where the scientific information, where the good planning sense tells you your town should go, it's likely not to be inconsistent with the regional master plan. That planning your town in conformance with the regional master plan is a good idea anyway, whether we were there or not. That we bring resources to the table, both financial and technical resources that can help them do their jobs better, right? That it's hard, right? Well, the majority of Highlands municipalities are small municipalities, right? Part-time people, right? Who have 100 other things that they have to do in their lives besides being the mayor or the committeeman or the council member at the town. We can make their lives easier. We can deflect a lot of things. We can solve a lot of their problems. We can convene the state agencies and bring resources to the table that will help them solve questions if they need us. And we can get people at the table who they can't get on their own, right? That there's a lot of things that we can do, right? And here's the thing, right? It's very tough, right? The way that New Jersey is set up, we're tackling issues that have a regional solution in a system that is designed to work on a municipal basis.
That sounds unsustainable.
Right. There's where there's a will, there's a way, right? It can be done, right? And that it's beneficial, right? And that the other thing is that if a municipal official thinks that planning on a regional basis takes away their control, they couldn't be more mistaken. Being able to tie your wagon to a bigger picture gives more validity to the decisions you make at the local level, and that you're going to be far less vulnerable to outside influences or the influence of individuals on the decisions you make for land use if you are making your decisions based upon that bigger picture, right? If you're doing it just based on what the four corners of your town dictate, you have no support for what you do. If you do it based upon where the four corners of your town fit into a much larger puzzle, you've got the rest of that puzzle to support the decision you make, and it's going to be a lot more durable, and it's going to be a lot less vulnerable to challenge.
Thank you very much, Ben. This has been fabulous. Remind folks, if you want more information, musconetcong.org on the web. We've been doing a Flow Together workshop series. Have your voices heard. Next week, we're actually going to be in Lebanon Township on November 2nd and Regal Ridge Country Club on November 14th. We want to hear from folks. So we encourage you to come to our Flow Together workshops, provide comment through email, look at our website. We have maps here. We have information. We encourage folks to take advantage of the opportunities to be more engaged. Thank you again for coming out. Thanks to the folks who joined us virtually. We appreciate this. This session has been recorded. We will put it on our website. Feel free to share the information, have other folks watch it. Good. Thank you.